This whole business is based on relationship and friendships.
Food is darn simple.
What can we do? What are other countries doing?
How important it is for industry to be talking about this.
We're going back to the farm. We're going back to the whole food.
Hi, I'm Wally Burns, the Education and Training Manager at CPMA. We are very excited to have CPMA President Ron Lemaire introduce MP Lianne Rood as CPMA's 2024 Produce Champion. Lianne is the Member of Parliament for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex in Ontario. Joining the conversation are CPMA board members Steve Bamford of Fresh Advancements and Quinton Woods of Gwillimdale Farms. CPMA's annual Produce Champion Award is given to a Member of Parliament or a senator who has been supportive of the produce industry and effective at bringing industry issues to the forefront on Parliament Hill. Listen now to this great conversation with Lianne, Ron, Steve, and Quinton.
Thanks, Wally. I'm excited to be joined by two CPMA board members today, Steve Bamford and Quinton Woods. Thank you both for joining us on this Produce Champion Award podcast.
Nice to be here.
Great to be here too, Ron.
Well, guys, you know what? This is going to be a great conversation. You know, we have a great guest joining us today, and soon we're going to have an opportunity to have a great conversation with this year's Produce Champion. And I'm really happy that MP Lianne Rood, Member of Parliament for Southern Ontario riding of Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, is going to be able to share some of her knowledge of what it's like to be an MP, you know, what it's been like on the Hill for her time and even before, because she's got a lot of experience on the political side. You know, she was elected back in 2019 and has been really active on driving and supporting the agri-food and agriculture industry. A lot of her work in the last few years on the opposition side in the Ag Committee, and as well working, coming from the farm and working with the wholesale market in Toronto. You know, there's all sorts of moving parts here that we're going to have an opportunity to dive into. So let's not waste any time. And I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Miss Rood on her award and welcome her to our Produce Champion podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for this honor.
You know, Lianne, I talked a little bit about some of your background, you know, coming from the farm, you know, having experience, you know, with the wholesale market, two very different worlds. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and let the listeners hear, you know, what drove you into politics and, you know, how you see things working on Parliament Hill.
Thank you so much, Ron. You know, coming from a family farm, it's such an honor, first of all, because I think that we don't value our farmers as much as we should, and the farm families that are behind those farmers. And as you said, I grew up on a farm, a produce farm. We farmed different types of vegetables, and both sets of grandparents of mine started their farms. They were immigrants to this country, and that was what they chose to do to make a living here in the Grand Bend area. And I'm lucky to be a third generation member of that family who continues to farm. And, you know, I've always been interested in federal politics. And I think it was really my grandmother who was very actively involved on the farm. She ran the family farm, and everybody was kind of a little bit afraid of her. And she was a go-getter, definitely not normal in her generation to be so active running the actual farming business, but also very active in advocating for farmers in the area, whether it was taking trips and making my grandfather drive her to Queen's Park in Toronto to meet with the agriculture minister or whatnot. She was a person in my life that really helped to shape what my view of agriculture was and farming, and why we should be so involved and actually use our voices to speak up for this industry and the families who are involved in this industry in helping to change policies and have the government be aware of what the policies are that they are changing or wanting to change, and why it's so necessary that we support farmers, and policies that government makes needs to support our farmers and keep them in the business of farming and growing food for Canadians.
You know what's really interesting there, and I just want to dial back a little bit before jumping into another question. talk about your grandmother. And, we have at CPMA, a Women in Produce program, really trying to reinforce the importance of what our industry is all about and how diversified it is. People tend to think of the farm, and they think of a farmer, they tend to traditionally think of a male figure. People forget that farms are built and in many cases driven by a very diversified background. And the influence of so many women on the farm, but on top of that, influencing across, whether it's 4-H, whether it's moving into politics, it's a big part of our history that really makes us successful.
Absolutely. And I think back to my childhood, it was just a normal thing for us growing up. There was 3 kids in the family. I was the oldest and the only girl in the family, but it was a normal practice to see my grandmother running the farm, running the packing house, while my grandfather would be out in the fields, and seeing my father out in the fields working the land and doing everything that needed to be done in the fields, while my mom would obviously take care of us, but also work alongside my grandma in the packing house. And they were the two that kind of ran that part of the business while the men of the family were out in the fields. And so we had to have a balance. And even as a teenager, it was part of the role of a family, was the women were just as active and involved in the farm and keeping the business running, but also had other responsibilities of making sure kids were fed, making sure we would have a meal to feed the farmers and the workers who are out in the field working during the evening hours, late into the evening, to get the harvest off before the rains would come. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners can relate with having many meals on tailgates in a field, or sitting in a tractor having a meal. It was just a family affair. As long as the work had to be done, we had to find a way to get it all done. And there was no gender, there was gender roles. But as my grandma used to say to all of us, there's no such things as a man job and a woman job. There's just work, and work has to be done, and you just figure out how to get it done.
Totally agree. A fabric of Canada. There's no doubt about it. I'm throw it over to Quinton, because Quinton, you're no stranger to politics. You work a lot at provincial and federal level. You're co-chair of our government issue management committee. And what are your thoughts on what you've heard so far? And do you have any other questions for Lianne?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of our members participate in our farm to plate and fall harvest events on the Hill, lobbying MPs and different government officials. But there's a lot of our membership that doesn't understand necessarily what an MP does, and may at times think the life of an MP is quite simple. Could you tell us, in the first 5 years of your tenure as an MP, what the biggest surprise or lesson is being an MP?
Well, thanks for that question, Quinton. I think that there's not actually a simple answer to that, but I think one of the most surprising things about this job, which I'm not immune to, having grown up on a family farm, is the fact that it isn't a simple life. It's actually a very complex life, full of a complex schedule, including a lot of travel to and from Ottawa and sometimes across the country when we're meeting with folks. And it's really hard to keep a work-life balance, especially in my case, where I'm still actively involved in a farming business and my farming business with my brother. And, as much as growing up on the farm, it really does teach you that there is a complex schedule. Work has to be done when work has to be done. And I think the motto in our family was always work hard, play hard. So you have the work you have to get done, but then you got to take that time for yourself to enjoy life a little bit. And I think having that background from the farm has really helped me transition over into life as an MP, because there's a lot of times where we're very, very busy and it's very intense, but then there's times where we have a little bit more flexibility in our schedule of what we can do, and just trying to find that work-life balance alongside running a business can be a little bit complex, but I think I'm managing pretty well so far. And but it does hit me sometimes how much there still is to do in this country, and how much government needs to really look at policies, and how much work as an MP, and having my farming background, we need to really look at and talk to the people who are in the work boots every day out there on the ground and try to bridge that gap between reality and what people see as the reality, the perceived reality, as they're working in Ottawa to what is actually reality on the ground for our farm families.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to a lot of our members. Long hours, lots of long days, lots of ongoing challenges, and so it sounds like your past history definitely set you up for success there.
Hey, Quinton, do you know, Lianne, you were a staffer before being an MP, though.
I was. You're right.
And did that help at all? Like, you kind of sit back and think about it, right? I know you worked in the minister's office and gained some of that experience, and you have a great staff team helping you now. Is there anything that you kind of learned as you were going through the staffer, or was there anything as a staffer you sat back and thought, I'm going to do things a little differently if I'm elected?
Yeah, I think when I started as a staffer, and I started actually working for my predecessor, who was Bev Shipley at the time, and that's how I kind of got my foot in the door to Ottawa, was he asked me to work for him in Ottawa. But life as a staffer there's a lot of similarities to life as an MP when you're a staffer, but there's also a lot of differences. And the main theme, I guess, is always you work very hard, and it can be very intense when as a staffer, when the minister was around or when the boss was around, when the House is sitting. But then when the House isn't sitting, you have a little bit more flexibility in the time and can kind of catch up on things. But when I went into Ottawa, I didn't go in as a staffer with the intent of thinking that I wanted to run and become a member of Parliament one day, even though that might be a little bit surprising. I didn't really have a vision for that at the time. My goal as a staffer was I want to go there and I want to be able to create change for Canada and have a positive impact on Canada. And I'm so fortunate that during my time as a staffer, I was able to work in the minister's office and actually be a part of a piece of very important Canadian history, which was Bill C-18, the Freedom for Grain Farmers Act. And to me, nothing prepared me for that, but I'm so fortunate to have been able to work on something that had such a great impact on the agriculture industry in Canada and use that experience now in my time as a member of Parliament, because having that experience in drafting a bill and working through that whole process and learning the process from ground zero all the way through to passing legislation, I think really taught me a lot of lessons. And I use those lessons every day as a member of Parliament now.
Perfect. You've just recently told us about your experiences, working on the farm, growing up as a kid and into a young adult, and then where you are today, working in a farming community, working on a produce operation. Quite a big potato operation at that. Can you tell us how your background has influenced your perspective on today's challenges and opportunities facing Canadian agriculture?
I think the biggest thing is the fact that when you grow up in a farm family, and I think anybody who's from a farm family can relate to this, you are living and breathing your farm operation on a daily basis, not just when you're in season, but it's an all year round thing. It's something we would sit at the dinner table and talk about every night as a family, what was happening. And you face the trials and tribulations together as a family, whether you're a kid or you're the parents. And sometimes as kids, we don't understand those trials and tribulations that are happening at the time. But I look back on my life, and I think our parents hid some of the things really well from us as kids, as far as challenges. But I think having that opportunity and coming from living that life on a daily basis gives a unique perspective to me when I'm looking at things as a member of Parliament and looking at policy and looking at legislation, because when you live and breathe agriculture and when you come from that background, it's very different than somebody looking in or learning the business after the fact. We've lived those lives. We've lived through ups and downs and droughts and floods and bad markets and too much on the market and price is bad, and just trying to figure out and problem solve, how do you keep this business afloat and what do we do to change the business perspective as the years went on to keep things going and keep innovating and being able to expand and actually just stay in business when you face all those challenges?
You know what, Quinton, that's a great question. And Lianne, I know the House Ag Committee undertake quite a few studies, but one of the key studies they looked at were some of the issues facing the Canadian horticultural sector. We were very happy as CPMA to have been asked to be a witness. And I know there were other partners within our network that were also part of that witness program as well, witness opportunity. But from that study, is there anything that, when you look back at it, that you would say are really key, some of the big takeaways that we could look at?
Well, Ron, I think the biggest takeaway when we talk about the produce sector versus other sectors is it's very volatile, and government policy has a greater impact than you'd expect on this particular sector. I think it's the most volatile of all the ag sectors because we're dealing with perishables, bottom line, when we talk about produce. And there's a lot that can't be changed easily. And when we're dealing with perishables versus, another commodity that can be stored for many, many, many months or a year, or it doesn't have the same impact as quickly as other sectors potentially. But I think, this sector in particular we need to make money in order to reinvest and modernize. And with price volatility, with relying completely on Mother Nature, as to whether or not you're going to have a crop or not. We have to be looking at policies that support our sector, but also with reasonable timelines, because otherwise public policy or government policy without reasonable timelines, without consultation, is going to kill our businesses instead of actually spurring innovation in this sector.
It's funny, and we've experienced, unfortunately, and I know you've been a strong advocate for trying to understand where the government is going on plastics. But there's a perfect example of not really understanding the market. And this isn't, I don't think, and this is, I think, a global issue, not only one in Canada, where, to your point on understanding the complexity of the horticultural sector and the agri-food sector and agriculture sector, more and more elected officials and bureaucrats are farther and farther away from the farm. So understanding what it really means to put forward a policy without the right due diligence is dangerous in many ways.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned this sector actually, not just our farmers here in Canada, but the sector as a whole is a global sector where, unlike, I think, some of the other sectors of agriculture, if we look, for instance, at ranchers, they're very it's very Canadian. And we look at the produce sector, we're talking about a global supply chain. And we mentioned, you mentioned the plastics and the fact that Canada imports 2/3 of our produce, and we're relying on other countries to actually feed us our fresh food. I think the government, number one, they need to stop arbitrary deadlines and consult our industry to better bring about reasonable change. I think that's one of the biggest things. Meeting the government's electoral promises is not worth bankrupting our sector because it has a wide-ranging, rippling effects that I think the general public doesn't understand.
Get it. I totally get it. You know what, Steve? I think that may hit home for you on some of the things you do, being an apple grower, a wholesaler, an importer, an exporter.
Thanks, Ron. Yes, it definitely does. And Lianne, thank you for accepting to be our Produce Champion Award. It's definitely well received by yourself, being such an advocate for our industry. The CPMA advocates for all of our members, and part of the issues that we're seeing, you did talk about, the plastic sustainability issues, but we've sort of moved now to more about sustainability across the board with 3 pillars, one being social, another being economic, and environmental sustainability. In your opinion, how can the government and the fresh produce industry work together to tackle these challenges?
Great. Thanks, Steve. I think, again, we need to work with the sector, and we need to use the industry science and data and working alongside our stakeholders to do more for the majority of Canadians than pleasing uneducated activists. I think farmers really deserve a government that's actually going to listen to them and not some elitists who've never put on work boots in their life. But we need to really consult and look at the experts in the field and not just rely on bureaucrats sitting in offices that have never put on a pair of work boots and who sit in their offices in suits every day. And I think that this sector is so important to our economy and to making sure that we have policies as a government to keep this sector sustainable for the future. That's what we have to look at, working completely with the stakeholders and taking their expertise and the science and data.
I've seen you stand up in the House and advocate for us issues such as plastic and international importing of different items from around the world, and how changes to that without proper thought or more thought, I guess, would be the better way to look at it, has helped us along the way to get our message across. So we do thank you for that. Another part of sustainability, though, that I look at within my business and our industry is just sustaining good people and finding people to be able to work in our workforce, not just necessarily, not only on farm, but also in the warehouse, to the grocery store, right across the board. Is there any ideas that you have that would help bring more people into the produce industry to understand how valuable it is and how they would want to create a career in this industry? Because it's not often thought about and it's not taught at many schools.
You're absolutely right, Steve. And whenever I have an opportunity to go into, whether it's elementary schools or high schools, the thing I see is that we have to start with education at a young age, that to teach kids that there's honor in all work, and we need to make sure we put more of an emphasis on the agriculture industry. I think back to when I was a kid, I think there was this negative connotation associated with farm kids, and that maybe that wasn't quite a reputable profession, or wasn't something to look up to working in the ag industry. And as time's gone on, we've seen that change, but I think we can still see more positive change instead of people looking down on the industry and thinking, that it's Farmer Joe or old McDonald out on the farm with tending to his animals and growing a little bit of food. It's actually a super innovative industry with a lot of different career opportunities, and that agriculture is the backbone of our economy, and everyone needs to eat. Hard work is gratifying, and it can be just as lucrative working in the agriculture industry. And when you talk to high school students who don't realize that a lot of our farms now are running equipment that is completely computerized, and we need people in all facets of educations, whether it's computer technicians or mechanics or accountants, where every farm now is so far advanced. I think most people are surprised, but if we educate people and plant those seeds with the young kids at a young age, that there is opportunity in this sector, I think we'll see the mentality change. But also I see, as I talk to students myself, they take that interest when they realize that you're modernized, you have computers, you run things on AI. Absolutely. Farming is a basic necessity of life, and so is the food that they grow. So if we educate kids and let them know that staying on the farm and introducing their friends to farm life might be better for everyone than a piece of paper with your name on it that holds lots of debt. So government needs to also make policies that will keep our farm families for next generations into the business as well.
Steve, you know what's funny on the whole piece? I know the domestic growth and development of our labor base is key, but immigration is always a big topic. It certainly is now, especially with it being linked to housing challenges. You look at your Fed-Prop territorial dynamic. How important is, I know, the TFW, Temporary Foreign Worker Program for agriculture is fundamental, but overall, when we look at CPMA, you look at the wholesalers and repackers, the warehouses, the complex business dynamic that we have, how does it all connect, Lianne? Do you see, relative to that immigration, domestic, the, technical resources, the non-technical resources? At some point, we need to bring all those pieces together. Is it doable?
I think it is. I think we have a lot of work to do as a government, and I've heard chatter from different levels of government when we talk about the immigration system and the changes that we're seeing happen right now. And I think one thing Canadians don't understand is how valued our seasonal agriculture workers are to agriculture, and the fact that we wouldn't have many of these farms even in existence, our produce farms, without our seasonal agriculture workers that come to work. And the reality is, and I mean, my family's faced it on our farm, and we've had seasonal workers, I think, since the inception of the program decades ago. They're vital to our business and they're like family to us. But a lot of those workers that want to come for the seasonality of the job, they don't want to immigrate here necessarily. In fact, if I think of the hundreds of people that have come through our farm, I can think of one of our workers who's actually immigrated to Canada, became a Canadian citizen. Out of all those workers, they want to go home. They don't want to be here permanently. And I think with the programs that we have right now, farmers, one thing that the public doesn't understand either is that they are responsible for the housing for their workers. So with the farm program, with our seasonal workers, we are not putting any pressure on the housing crisis that we're facing right now with the housing shortage, because farmers are responsible for providing the housing for these workers. And so I think if we can work towards fixing some of the programs, but also looking at people who want to come to the agriculture sector from other countries who have experience, and we need to be looking at targeted immigration for specific roles that people have where they're educated and trained and want to continue working in that. And I think often agriculture is overlooked as one of those places where we could be bringing in people. People look at doctors or engineers or some of the building trades if we're short somewhere, but they never look at agriculture as bringing in people with experience from other countries that can help us in this sector. So I think that's something we need to look at as well.
Yeah, you know what? I'm just going to jump on a soapbox for a second and say, if the media continue to put the seasonal worker images online, it's anytime you talk about a temporary foreign worker issue, it tends to be a produce image that gets put up, which is so wrong in my mind. And even the media don't really understand. They automatically divert back to, someone picking an apple or someone picking potatoes or whatever. And you know what? There's a lot of work even from the association world that we need to do to better educate the media relative to what it is and what it isn't, because there's a lot of misinformation being circulated unintentionally or perhaps intentionally around the country, which is work ahead of us, I think. Anyway.
Absolutely. And from experience, and I know I've actually had media hang up on me before during an interview when I wasn't giving them the narrative they wanted on our seasonal agriculture workers, because the fact of the reality is, in this business, in the produce world, these workers actually are part of our family. And I can speak to the fact that we had workers that came for 25 years. So they watched me grow up since I was a toddler or a teenager to the time I was elected, and they were still working on our farm. And that is with many farms. And that's a testament to how well we treat the workers, because without them, we wouldn't have our businesses. So what people see out in the media is not accurate. And it is very frustrating as somebody who's lived with seasonal agriculture workers, like living on the property, how bad of the narrative is out there in the media on this, when in fact it's the complete opposite in this industry. And of course, there's always going to be some bad apples and some bad players here and there, and they're rightfully punished with things. But we value our seasonal workers. It is not what the media says. And without them, Canadians, quite frankly, wouldn't be fed with the fresh produce that they have right now.
And you know what? You hit it right on the head. There are bad players everywhere, and we have the systems in place to address them. And that's the key, right? So
absolutely.
And they're few and far between. Anyways, you know what? I know there's a lot coming down the pipe. So I know, Quinton, like, you've got a great program running at Gwillimdale. But you and I were chatting a little bit about the current political landscape.
Oh, yeah. We want to talk about volatility. I mean, we just have to look at Parliament Hill these days. But it's a lot of interesting political games going on in Parliament Hill these days. As an outsider looking in, Lianne, can you give us kind of an overview of what you anticipate to see on the Hill, and specifically, your role in the House of Commons Ag Committee?
Yeah, well, there's lots to talk about politically, even in the last week, but it seems every week there's something new. But I think going forward into the fall session, I think we can count on the government members to continue to be obstructionist. I think we have a lot of ideas that are being put forward that have little or no grounding in actual reality. We talk about the plastics ban as one example. The policies this current government is putting forward might work in Europe, but in North America, it's not going to work. And it appears to be that the government is continuing to be hooked on promoting things that are just not workable in this country or in North America as a whole. But for my conservative colleagues and I think we'll be continue to look at common sense measures that are going to help farmers get ahead and help feed Canada. And I think it's going to be an exciting time. We found out yesterday our agriculture committee is going to stay the same with the same membership. So I look forward to working with my colleagues. I have to say, for the most part, our agriculture committee does get along very well across party lines, because I think no matter what, at the end of the day, everybody realizes we need to eat and we need to be supporting our farmers. And we might have different ideologies on what policies will work best to do that. But coming from conservatives, I think you'll continue to see us put forward common sense solutions. And obviously, we'll continue to make things a priority that industry wants us to make a priority, because I think a lot of what we do on our agriculture committee is driven by industry and what's happening within the industry at the time. Yeah,
and I think there's a couple bills still at play, that your party's put forward. I mean, definitely Bill C-234 is definitely of importance to us. And, we've seen a lot of hurdles with that one, but there's one that's made quite a bit of progress, which is Bill C-280. And, with it being in the Senate, we're very hopeful as an industry that gets put through the Senate in the fall session. And, our members will be on the Hill in fall harvest, and we'll definitely be, lobbying to get that one through. So we appreciate your support on them. And we hope that you guys keep driving that message forward.
Absolutely. We'll continue to push for that bill for C-280 to get through the Senate quickly. And of course, just to touch on C-234, we'd love to see the government members back this bill and get this bill passed and handed back over to the Senate. But regardless of what happens, I think we all know there's a federal election looming. We don't know when, if it's next fall, next spring, but by next fall, we'll definitely be in a federal election. And no matter what happens with these bills, I think you can count that conservatives will make these issues a priority when we form government after the next election, and we'll make sure that these changes are made because they're absolutely necessary for this industry.
You know what, Lianne, you talking about the federal election coming, I think Quinton mentioned our fall harvest. So this is one of our biggest lobby days for CPMA and the fruit and vegetable growers of Canada. So just for the listeners and the CPMA members, want to remind everybody that we are on the Hill from November 18th to 20th. And especially with the election coming down the pipe, this is probably the most important year in many that you get engaged and you participate and join us to be, meeting with members of parliament and senior officials to make sure our voice is heard around where all of our moving parts are and how important our issues are as we move forward towards the election. So registration is open, and you can visit the CPMA website to register and be part of all the action on the Hill. And I know, Lianne, you get part of that action. We come and see you every year, and I think the engagement is quite good from your experience.
Absolutely. I would encourage anybody out there listening, be a part of it. Experience coming to Parliament Hill to talk with parliamentarians, senators, members of parliament, because it's your voice. When you amplify your voice and you bring your voice to the table in Ottawa, it's difficult for parliamentarians not to listen to you. And when we hear stories that are personal from people, I think it does make a difference, especially for those members who may not come from an agriculture background or who come from a more urban setting. It's the educational piece. You help to educate our parliamentarians on where their food comes from. And when you use your voices collectively together and you amplify an issue, that's where you're going to see change. It has to come right from the grassroots, right from the front lines.
You don't have to be a professional lobbyist, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, just be yourself and come and talk. I think this is what is so important that people don't realize, right?
No, we prefer talking to the real people than we prefer talking to lobbyists. No offense to the lobbyists out there. There's some really good ones. But when, like I said, when it's personal, that's when we like to hear right straight from people.
Being the registered lobbyist for CPMA, I won't take offense.
You mentioned that it's critical and important this year, more so than probably some other years. And people might be sitting at home and wondering why. So I'm going to ask Lianne why it's so important going into an election year. Is that because we can help frame some election promises going forward and help educate people going forward that can carry forward for the next 4 or 5 years or so?
Absolutely. And one thing our leader, Pierre Poilievre, has said, and no offense to you, Ron, I know you're a registered lobbyist. We love some of our lobbyists. We love you. But what's going to drive policy for the Conservative Party in particular is people. It's the people. We want to hear from people on the ground. We want to hear your stories. We want to hear those experiences. And when we sit and have conversations with real life people who are living, breathing this industry on a daily basis, it really does help give us a different perspective. And when we're talking about an election year, every party right now is looking for policies to put in their platform. And sometimes one small conversation with one person who showed up on Parliament Hill with one small ask can actually drive change. And I've seen that happen with certain private members' bills, and taking an idea that somebody came up with that wasn't a lobbyist, that is part of a group, and we see significant change out of small conversations. And that's why it's important, I think, for everybody to participate in some way, shape, or form. And if you have the opportunity to come to Parliament Hill and have those conversations with members of Parliament from all political stripes, that's how you educate them and how change can actually happen in the form of policies into platforms when election time is.
You're absolutely right, Leanne. If Steve and I can do it, the rest of them can do it too.
Especially if you can do it, Quinton.
Exactly.
Well, everyone, you know what, on behalf of CPMA, Lianne, I want to thank you and congratulate you again on being our 2024 produce champion. And Steve, Quinton, thanks for joining us on this podcast. You know, the work, Lianne, that you do, and also I have to say, Steve, Quinton, the work you do on our board, the work you do in and day out to make sure Canadians are fed is key to making this industry vibrant, making Canada stronger. And together with Lianne, our produce champion, our industry, I think we're all better off. And the future does look bright. So Lianne, thank you. Congratulations. Thanks to everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast.
Thank you all so much. And thank you for all the hard work you do as well to advocate on behalf of our produce sector.
Thank you to Lianne, Quinton, Steve, and Ron for taking time out of your busy schedules for this interesting and informative conversation. And to the listeners, thank you for listening. Remember, you can subscribe to Produce Talks at Apple Podcast, Simplecast, Spotify, and on most other podcast players. Until next time, fill half your plate with fruits and veggies. Continue to seek out new knowledge and basically never stop growing.